The state of the Texans wide receiver position. What will they do? What should they do? What could they do? They've hired an offensive coordinator. Now all attention shifts to personnel. It is SNL, Landry Lockett, Cody Stoots with you. Cody has a few scenarios, layouts of potential wide receiver targets. But before that, let's just look at the state of the Texans wide receiver position heading to the offseason. And it's kind of discouraging when you look at how you thought about these wide receivers heading into last season versus this season. Last season, you had Dell. You thought at minimal, he could develop into a really good number 2 wide receiver. He was on his rookie contract. We don't anticipate him playing next year. Nico Collins, same old, looking just as good, although a little bit more expensive now. And then your young guys in John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson, you thought maybe they'd take the next step. Really didn't. So right now, when it comes to wide receiver investments, current investments, you have Nico Collins on his deal, and then you have 3 guys under contract on rookie deals, one of which isn't going to play next year, 2 of which could very easily not even be on the squad next year. So the state of the wide receiver position, it's an important position. It's got to be something that the Texans attack maybe in multiple areas this offseason.
I mean, calling Xavier Hutchinson or John Mechie at this point an investment would be a bit generous. Like, I don't feel like either of those guys are big-time key pieces that you can count on. They're going to have to be challenged in training camp. They're going to have to earn their way onto this roster. There's no more, oh, well, they were here last year. They know the system. This guy or that guy's comfortable with new system. Guys should be in there challenging them, pushing them. There should be rookies in there pushing them. There should be veterans in there pushing them. Nico Collins is the only wide receiver this team has of note. And you can't win with just Nico Collins. They're going to have to go out there and find him some running mates, find him some help. They're going to have to be a mix of veterans and rookies. It can't all be one way or the other. And I don't envy the position that Nick Caserio's in, because he thought he was going to have at least 2 spots solidified for a few seasons when Nico Collins got his contract extension. Tank Dell's unfortunate injury derails that quite a bit. So now you've got to pivot and figure it out.
And the fortunate thing for them, I guess, if we want to look glass half full from that, is that Tank Dell was on his rookie deal anyway. So it's not like you invested heavily and then you have to pivot. You have a lot of money, depending on what I think teams probably set budgets somewhat, like how much you want to invest in wide receiver. The Texans really don't have a lot invested. I think that in all honesty, I would be okay with them drafting a guy and signing guys. I actually think it should be the premium pick that you use, and then signing guys as well would be the way to do it. And that's where I want to touch before we get into Cody's 4 areas for wide receivers. I think there's a nice little juggling act that you can have when it comes to juggling, drafting a wide receiver and free agency / trade. And I'm saying that because I know that a lot of these guys that you sign are going to be expensive, but if you draft a wide receiver, then it's not going to be as expensive. So I think maybe you can overpay salary-wise for a veteran and then swing for the fences with the rookie and hope that guy ends up developing into your number 2, maybe number 1B receiver, while you have kind of that veteran that you're paying a little bit more money to. It's almost like when you have a quarterback on his rookie deal and you're willing to overpay other areas. I kind of think there's an interesting juggling act where the Texans can go, okay, maybe we're paying a little bit too much for this wide receiver, but if we draft a young wide receiver, then that's not as big of a deal.
Like your total financial commitment, it doesn't necessarily matter how you split it. If you spend a little bit more on a nicer free agent, maybe you use a little bit less from the draft capital standpoint, unless something just plops into your lap. I mean, you can't have too many wide receivers. So if you spent on one of the more impressive names at wide receiver and also had a really good receiver fall to you at 25, then do it. Get both of them and figure it out, because more often than not, that veteran's not going to be here for more than a year or 2. I mean, when you sign these guys close to 30, after 30, it's typically short-term commitments. And at best, it's 2 years usually. At worst, it's 1 year and it's see you later. I mean, like it could have been with Robert Woods last year. But yeah, I think you've got to have some sort of idea of the allocation to improving that room as you start the entire process if you're Nick Caserio, and you got to work with what does D'Amico Ryans need / want? What does Nick Caley need / want? Against putting together like a plan that's executable.
And let's do that right now. You have 4 categories of guys, potential targets that the Texans could go after. It's different tiers. It's kind of polarizing. I have some stuff to add throughout that. I know people in the chat got some stuff to say, a lot of hot takes. We'll get to that at the end. Super chats go to the front. Let's start with your first category, and the guy that's probably most popular, not just here, but around the NFL. Very polarizing name, very intriguing name, and a connection based on one of the decisions that the Texans have made in the last couple of days.
It's called Hey, I Know That Guy, and that guy is Cooper Kupp. And obviously, everybody knows Cooper Kupp. He was the best wide receiver in football in 2021. It was one of the most impressive runs we've seen from a wide receiver. And then the past 3 years since that season, it's been okay. It's been good sometimes. It's been not as good. There's certainly injury concerns about how he's been unable to finish full seasons over the course of the past 3 years, but he's still a productive football player. And the I know that guy factor is Nick Caley knows exactly what's left in the tank. Like, he has a full total understanding of what Cooper Kupp has left, what he can do, what Cooper Kupp would bring to the table if you added him to the offense that Nick Caley's going to run. So Cooper Kupp's the Hey, I Know That Guy category.
I think it's going to be a cheap trade when it comes to Cooper Kupp. I know there's a lot of other names that emerge. DK Metcalf seems to be a popular name, but I think there's a costly trade versus non-costly trade. DK Metcalf's in the final year of his deal. He's probably going to be looking for a really, really large contract. So if you make the trade for DK Metcalf, I would assume that you're going to have to give up more equity than you would for Cooper Kupp, especially given the fact that they're working with him on the trade. Also, probably going to have to spend a little bit more money on him. The Cooper Kupp thing, I think, is interesting because if you pay Cooper Kupp and you trade for Cooper Kupp and then you get a young wide receiver, I think it works out. Now, the obvious questions with Cooper Kupp are the injuries. He's had the lower body injuries. No torn ACL. Stefon Diggs is coming off a torn ACL. First time that he's been significantly injured in his career. So the Cooper Kupp thing for me is intriguing. Is he what he once was? Probably not. Does he provide you with something that very few guys can provide you with when he's at his best? Yes. He's an intermediate passing option for CJ Stroud. He can do work in the slot. He knows this system. He's a good culture guy. He's been there, done that. I think Cooper Kupp, if you're going to pay a little bit and roll the dice with the question marks, I think Cooper Kupp is more intriguing to me than trading what you would have to trade for DK Metcalf, investing in that. I would rather find a DK Metcalf in the draft that is on a rookie deal, like someone like that same caliber type of player, swing for the fences there, and then get somewhat of a risk / reward guy in Cooper Kupp and bring him in. So I actually like the Cooper Kupp angle because I don't think it's going to cost much when it comes to a trade. The current contract, it's not going to be the case. The Rams are probably going to have to eat some of that.
The current contract, don't think that that's what he's making because they're either the Rams eat some of it or the Texans adjust it once he gets here. So it's not going to be that expensive as it looks right there. Obviously, it does cost you a draft pick, probably that 4th rounder, maybe the 5th rounder if you're willing to talk more money with them. So maybe you don't want to spend the money on Cooper Kupp. Maybe he is too expensive. You don't want to invest the draft pick. I got another Hey, I Know That Guy, but cheaper. Demarcus Robinson. Also played on the Rams last year. The expectation is Robinson's going to make anywhere from $3 to $5 million in the upcoming seasons. Played for the Rams for the past 2 seasons. He's been a pretty productive wide receiver for them, 11 touchdowns in 2 seasons. A little bit more in 2024, obviously because of the Puka Nacua injuries, the Cooper Kupp injuries. A little bit more in 2024 than in 2023. He's going to be 31. You're not asking him to come in and be a 1,000-yard receiver and just come in there, be a veteran, be a pro. And here's another thing about Demarcus Robinson, plays all the games. Mr. Consistency, 17, 16, 17, 17, 16, 16, 16, on and on and on throughout the course of his career. He plays all the games. He doesn't miss time. He doesn't have an injury history, and he's cheaper. And, oh, by the way, Nick Caley knows that guy.
Yeah, he's 30 years old. He's been around for a long time. If you're talking about just bringing him in as a 4 or 5, whatever, I think that works. The wide receiver market is always interesting. It's always a lot of times you trade for potential. It never pays. Our sign potential. It doesn't necessarily pay off. And this guy could have been this if this guy weren't in front of him. The Robinson thing, I don't even think bringing in Demarcus Robinson would be something that would stop me from pursuing Cooper Kupp. I think if you're going to sign multiple guys, I think that's fine. So I'm not opposed to Demarcus Robinson, but I don't even think you have to pick between Cooper Kupp and Demarcus Robinson. I think he's one of those guys who could be a back end guy and figure some stuff out. I don't think he's going to break bread or anything like that either.
Yeah, I mean, look, if he's the only veteran investment, then you're in a lot of trouble. He can't be the only guy, but I mean, think about how bad wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 looked at times this year for the Texans. Guys like Demarcus Robinson keep guys from Jared Wayne from ever getting on the field. So that'd be my thought. All right, let's do another one here, another category. It's called Let's Tap Into That Potential. Josh Palmer, formerly of the Chargers. Palmer, 4 years with the Chargers, okay stats. He had one really impressive season by his standards in 2022, where he had almost 800 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's his best season so far. The Chargers have continuously invested in wide receivers. He hasn't ever really stepped up to that level, but he's got some skills, a little bit of a deep threat, had some success down the stretch when other guys were out for the Chargers that helped them get in the playoffs. Any interest in Josh Palmer?
I think you could throw Elijah Moore in that category as well. I don't know. The market for Elijah Moore is going to be pretty interesting. He kind of found himself a little bit in Cleveland, but that's another guy I think that kind of has high upside. Someone might overpay for him. Josh Palmer's an interesting name. I would still rather go with Cooper Kupp and drafting somebody. I think Josh Palmer is probably going to be a little bit more expensive than some of the guys that we mentioned with the Robinson and all that. I just think the risk reward of Cooper Kupp for me, it would prevent me from Josh Palmer. The Robinson, I don't think Robinson impacts the Cooper Kupp decision, but I think the Josh Palmer market, the Elijah Moore market, might be awkward. And I always talk about the awkward wide receiver market in free agency. Do you jump in or do you let the market speak? And more times than not, whenever teams jump in and they just decide, hey, this guy's going to be, this guy's going to find his untapped potential, a lot of times it just really doesn't work out. Like you see it, you saw it last, and I know there was injury, but Zay Jones last year with Buffalo, that was kind of one of the more intriguing guys. Do you pay this guy like he can be a number one, or do you just kind of let the market speak? And another guy who got injured that kind of the market spoke to him was Hollywood Brown. He sat around, he was looking for a deal, and then all of a sudden, boom, he wants to play for a contender, so the Chiefs get him for 1 year, $9 million. Obviously didn't pay off in the regular season, but they probably hope that in the big game or whatever it does. That's kind of my preference when it comes to diving in on guys like Josh Palmer and Elijah Moore, especially if you already have a top-end guy like Nico Collins and you're just trying to build around him, or you're willing to draft a wide receiver. I kind of like to stay out of the Josh Palmer market unless it just speaks to him and you can get him on like a team-friendly deal.
Well, what if I told you there was a wide receiver version of Joe Mixon out there?
Okay, I got to hear this.
Okay, so here's the setup. Joe Mixon was thought to be on the wrong side of the running back age chart. He was getting ready to deteriorate, fall apart, and then we saw that Joe Mixon, he's a bell cow. He can keep it going. This guy is a little bit older, but he's on the wrong side of 30 for most wide receivers, and his team probably wants to get rid of him and might say, hey, we're getting rid of him. And then you sneak in there with a little small draft pick compensation at the last second to make sure he's yours. How would Tyler Lockett fit for you? Lockett's been super productive. He's played basically every game in his NFL career. It's dropped off a little bit the past couple seasons. I think you can point to DK Metcalf being really good. They invested in Jackson Smith and Jigba, as well as Geno Smith, the freaking quarterback. Tyler Lockett, he'll be 33 years old this year, so definitely the wrong side of 30 for you.
Okay.
But still productive, still maybe gives you a couple years.
Yeah, he's an older guy. I don't know that he's obviously not going to have the impact of Mixon, but I think it's kind of a grain of salt type of comparison where they just kind of decide to move on from him. But yeah, I like Tyler Lockett. I'm a Lockett fan. Again, it's all going to go back to Cooper Kupp. I think Cooper Kupp is a bargain. I think it's higher upside than we think. I don't think that when you put Cooper Kupp with Nico Collins, I don't think you're expecting as much. I think if you draft the other wide receiver, I think you got significant upside there as well. So I'm going to be reeled back in the direction of Cooper Kupp with every wide receiver that we talk about. But I think the thing that we got to remember is we're not in a position, and this is the awkward position where you're in, and this is kind of where the Tennessee Titans were last year. They have no number one wide receiver. So they overpay for Calvin Ridley, and they find themselves in kind of an awkward spot. That's not where the Texans are. The Texans, you have your wide receiver one, so you can kind of swing for the fences and you can adjust accordingly. You're also not invested in wide receivers. Like the Jacksonville Jaguars, they basically said, bye-bye, Calvin Ridley. We're not going to overpay you. And then they found Brian Thomas. The Texans are in a position to where they can try to find their Brian Thomas in this draft. I know that's a big thing, but it happens all the time. Like we see wide receivers in the 20s. They're in a position to where you feel good about wide receiver one, so you don't have to overpay for guys. You can still kind of be somewhat aggressive when it comes to filling in the wide receiver depth chart, and you can swing for the fences in the draft. So where the Texans are lined up at wide receiver, it's actually pretty favorable because it's not like you have to blindly try to find a wide receiver one. So the Tyler Lockett's, the Cooper Kupps and stuff, while they have questions, you don't have to overpay. And I think the DK Metcalf would kind of fall into the Calvin Ridley category because you're trading for him and then you're going to pay him. And I'm assuming you're going to pay him like he's one of the best wide receivers in the league. I think DK Metcalf's a good player. I just don't think the Texans are in a position like trading for Garrett Wilson. If you really, really needed a wide receiver one, maybe you get to that point where you're trading and paying a guy. The Texans aren't there because they have the safety net of Nico Collins. So it's an interesting juggling act that they have.
Yeah, DK Metcalf's, I mean, it feels kind of pipe dreamy to me. I mean, he's coming at the end of a $24 million a year average annual value contract. Like, he's going to want at least that. The Texans don't have that kind of money, even if they're moving money around and adjusting things. Like, Metcalf feels like you're just priced out of it with the situation that you're in. I would say you're priced out of T. Higgins. You're priced out of Chris Godwin. I feel like those guys, you're priced out of them just because of the financial commitment. Guys like Lockett, guys like Kupp, yeah, they're more expensive than some of these free agents, but you can adjust the contract. You can kick the can down the road a little bit, and they're not as expensive. They're obviously not going to be as productive as a Higgins, a Metcalf, a Godwin, but you got to get what you can get if you're the Texans.
Yeah, and I think that there's a really good goal for the Texans heading into this wide receiver market where you can establish top-end youth and you can still churn the bottom of the wide receiver room. If you can establish what you thought you had last year, where you thought you had Nico Collins and you had Tank Dell, and you can kind of find a guy that you feel kind of like you did with Tank Dell, maybe even better given the fact that it could be a first-round pick, then I think you're in good shape. And then if you're churning wide receiver 3 through 6, that's fine. You don't have to sit around and try to figure something out. I think we see that with the Chiefs. We see them do that quite often. But if you can just kind of establish the top end, the top two dogs, and then churn, I think you're in good shape. I think the Philadelphia Eagles are a prime example of that, where you got your A.J. Brown, a.k.a. your Nico Collins. You drafted your Devontae Smith. And after that, you can just kind of try to figure stuff out and adjust accordingly and figure out your weapons. The Texans really just need to establish their number 1 and 2 top end. I think you do that in the draft. And then the discussions about the Cooper Kupps and all this other stuff, that's where you kind of churn and figure it out and kind of swing for the fences there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd take a late round wide receiver every year so that bottom of the roster is always fighting like hell to stay around. I'd sign a veteran every year to kind of fight for a roster spot at the bottom, and then hopefully my top 2 guys stay my top 2 guys. The Texans thought they had top 2 guys. Tank injury, that eliminates it. Even Tank's performance in 2024 might have eliminated him as a top 2 guy. You still might be looking for a guy even if he was healthy, but they've got to find that number 2 to Nico Collins, and then they've got to have as many options as possible for a guy that any given week can be the number 3.
On the super chat, another name coming up, Chris Godwin. I mean, if you think Cooper Kupp's injury prone, I think Chris Godwin is even more. But again, if you can get Godwin on a 1 year type of deal or something like that and still draft a wide receiver, I mean, I think you could do a lot worse. It's just kind of the same category of the Kupp, the Lockett, the older, the question marks, all that type of stuff.
The thing with Godwin is like coming off a broken ankle, it's easier to project and think about what he's going to do than like coming off of a significant or serious knee injury like what Stefon Diggs went through. So it's like it's easier to project that like, okay, Chris Godwin, like on his way to, what was going to be a really good season for him. It's easier to project that a little bit and maybe have a fun, if you're his agent, like, hey, he was getting ready to do this. It's just a broken ankle. It's like, yeah, well, anytime somebody has a season-ending injury, it's not good, agent. But I think he's going to get paid. I think he's going to make a lot of money, multi-year deal. I wouldn't be shocked if the Jaguars are in on him. Just because of what Liam Cohen was able to do with him in the 7 games that he did play. I just don't know that you can get into the price range for him.
The history of the Texans wide receiver position, I think, is kind of fascinating too, because for a large portion of the Texans, you've had that when you've had that wide receiver one, you haven't necessarily had the main complement. It seems like Andre Johnson's entire career, there was always it's just Andre. Find some help for Andre Johnson. If only you can get that wide receiver too. And then with DeAndre Hopkins, there was kind of that same vibe, but then you had Will Fuller. And for a short time, I mean, that was a dynamic duo with Watson. And then Nico Collins, there's kind of a question about, is Nico Collins a wide receiver one? As soon as you kind of start feeling like he is, there's this Tank Dell guy who you feel like can be a wide receiver too. And then Tank Dell gets hurt. Same thing with Stefon Diggs. So the craziest thing about the 2-decade-ish history of the Texans is they've never really been able to find like that consistent balance of wide receiver one and wide receiver two, both playing at a high level for an extended period of time. It's always been kind of either absent or you've been kind of teased on it. And that's the fascinating thing about the Texans wide receiver situation. And I actually think there is an opportunity to really put together like a very, very good wide receiver room right now, especially if we're under the assumption that they're going to draft someone and invest, whether it's in trade, free agency, combination of the two. There's a chance to put together an incredibly impressive wide receiver room because despite the fact there's a lack of depth, you do have Nico Collins who you feel really good about.
Yeah, if you get a really good rookie at 25, and then you're set that 1-2 spot for the next few seasons. Obviously, Nico's extended. The rookie will have 4 or 5 years before he gets paid, 3-4 years before he gets paid. So that'd be ideal. Even if you got the guy at 58 and had a veteran to like Cooper Kupp's level, where it's like, okay, the kid can kind of ease into the 2, and then him and Kupp can sort of flip at the end of this year, and then the kid's the 2 and Kupp's the 3. Like even if you had that, you'd feel pretty comfortable about the situation. But there's a lot of wide receivers in this draft. There's a lot of wide receivers every draft.
Every draft. Yeah.
So, go find somebody that you like. Go find somebody that fits what Nick Haley's going to do and can fit in next to what Nico Collins does and go be able to throw the ball again like he did.
There's really no such thing as no man's land when it comes to drafting a wide receiver. Like that you go look in like the 20s of like the last how many ever drafts, like, and even later, like studs are found. Like they're found all over the place. And there's no such thing as no man's land. Like if you needed a quarterback and you were drafting there, you'd be like, damn, maybe even an edge guy, maybe even a corner. There's exceptions to everything, but there's always the good thing about a lack of wide receiver depth, a lack of running back depth, a lack of tight end depth is there's a lot of opportunities. And if those are your biggest needs, then it's a pretty decent position to be in. The marquee positions, the Texans are actually kind of set at, which is really like corner, edge, tackle, I guess, if you want to say Tunsil and you want to assume that you have your tackle of the future in Fisher, and I think those are going to be your starting tackles no matter what. They're kind of in an interesting spot where they can find some of the things that they need to find. Another name coming up on the super chat from Zach, Darius Slayton.
I was surprised looking at Spot Rack's projection for him, how much money he's expected to make. He has not had a tremendous career with the Giants. Obviously, he can point to, hey, look at who my quarterbacks have been. I've actually done better than most people expected me to do. But he's projecting at over $15 million a year. It's pretty pricey.
Yeah, that's a lot. The projections are always interesting. They're always, I think Hollywood was really high last year, and then it ended up being 1 year 9. That's the other thing about this. And this is why when you start talking about free agents, that it's really, really interesting, because teams know that you can find wide receivers in the draft too. So a lot of times, like, the market speaks to these wide receivers. I think the market is probably going to speak to Stefon Diggs a little bit more harshly than he's anticipating, because I think he thinks he's up to this level, and I think he's down to kind of like closer to this level. He's closer to Hollywood Brown than he is like breaking some sort of bread and getting some sort of 3-year contract. And I don't know that that's going to be something that he handles well. And that's why when we start talking about Cooper Kupp versus Stefon Diggs, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, say what you want about Cooper Kupp's injuries. I think there's kind of a gray area, given the fact that in one of the seasons, the Rams were a lost cause. They won 5 games. And in other seasons, they had Puka Nacua, who is one of the better slot guys in the league. He's a history setting rookie wide receiver. So you factor that in. You factor in the mindset that Cooper Kupp's coming in with, and the mindset that Stefon Diggs is coming in with. I think that's something that you kind of got to take into account. And the other thing is, after the draft, a lot of these guys are just bargains. Like, they're just complete bargains. Like Hollywood Brown, bargain. I think he signed after the draft, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been right before. But the market kind of spoke to him, and they still drafted Xavier Worthy. Like, that's what I'm looking at with the Texans. The Chiefs didn't even have Nico Collins, but the Chiefs last year, with the lack of weapons that they had, they traded for DeAndre Hopkins in season. They signed Hollywood Brown, and they drafted Xavier Worthy in the first round. That's what I think the Texans need to do. And the good thing about the Texans is they have Nico Collins. The Chiefs didn't have that. It's not a bad place to be in.
Well, the Chiefs had Rashee Rice. They had a lot of expectations for him, and he was really good before he got hurt.
Yeah.
He wasn't Nico Collins, but he was their top guy.
He also kind of got in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, they didn't know if he was going to be suspended. So
yeah, he kind of got in a little bit of trouble too.
Yeah, knock on wood, Nico Collins didn't leave in his car on 45 right next to SMU.
Yeah, don't think that's going to happen with Nico.
No, it's not. So
I think it's a good spot to be in when it comes to wide receiver. I think there's a lot of options. There's a lot of interesting things that they can do. It's always been kind of a polarizing position around here. But as far as the offseason goes, I like some of the names that you're throwing out there. Cooper Kupp's obviously going to be the biggest one for a long, long time, going to generate a lot of discussion. But as bad as things appear at the wide receiver position, they're not as bad as they may seem. And I think it can shape up quite nicely in the next 3-4 months to where you feel a lot better about this wide receiver position.
I would say when you're thinking rookies, be thinking about a rookie with 25 or 58. Don't be thinking about it with the third or later, because you look at year in, year out, most of the top receivers are first or second round guys. Most of the top receivers are first or second round guys. I'm looking through last year. Amon-Ra St. Brown at 5 is an exception. Everybody else around him is a first rounder. And then even going down to like the 20s, you're looking at guys in the second round, first round. It's very rare to find guys right away in the 3rd, 4th, 5th. Texans don't even have a 6th right now, 7th. So first, second round, one of those 2 picks. If you're thinking rookie wide receiver, you got to be thinking about with one of those 2 picks.
Yep. And I think they will be.
I believe they will be too.
Ibuka is a real popular name out of Ohio State. It's going to be interesting to see what his draft stock is, but don't threaten me with a good time. I would be down with that as well, on top of the veterans and stuff. So we'll see how this whole thing goes. The wide receiver position, extremely, extremely interesting. Cooper Kupp, obviously the big name. And then there's other tiers, and it's a crazy market. It's gonna speak to a lot of guys, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity. And the other thing about the Texans, they're kind of in that category now where if a guy has options and he wants to go prove himself, it's an intriguing wide receiver room to enter. And it's also kind of one of those, they're kind of in the category of teams where you sign a 1-year deal to kind of go prove it. Like we've seen with Baltimore, Kansas City, a lot of the better teams in the league. So they're actually setting up pretty nicely to where they can be somewhat picky. They don't have to be overly aggressive and reckless when it comes to the wide receiver position. I think they can fix this sooner rather than later. So we'll see how that whole thing goes.
Yeah, I'm going to go look and see how many of these guys are represented by athletes first, too, just in case, you know.
Probably most of them. Subscribe, like, right along. Always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together, no matter what they do at wide receiver.
Eat good, sleep good, be good. We'll talk Texans again soon. Thanks for watching, everybody.